Professor Ytzhak from Aristotle University, Thessaloniki, Greece, right? Professor Kerem is a historian and researcher on Greek and Sephardic Jewry, Aristotle University, Thessaloniki, Greece, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, founder of the Foundation for Jewish Diversity in Los Angeles and Beit Maxim, the Heritage Center for the Sephardic and Eastern Jewish Communities in Jerusalem, editor of the monthly academic email publication Sfarad, the Sephardic newsletter since 1992, former co-host of Hebrew weekly radio show Diaspora Jewry, Reshet Aleph Kol Israel Jerusalem, co-author of award-winning guidebook, The Researching Sephardic and Oriental Genealogy in Israel. And the title of his presentation is Mediterranean Cultural Icons Crossing Religious Affiliations Throughout the 20th, 21st Centuries. בבקשה.
Throughout the 20th century and beyond, there have been several cases of Mediterranean artists and cultural symbols closening themselves or converting to other religions, shedding light on fluidity between cultures and religions in the milieu of these artists and cultural icons. Rosa Ashkenazi went from being a Sephardic Judeo-Spanish speaking girl, moving from Istanbul to Salonika at the end of the Ottoman period, and during the Greek period to being the symbol and singer of the Asia Minor Greek Orthodox refugee Rembetiko social protest movement in Athens from the 20s to the 70s, living alternative sexual lifestyles with Greek Orthodox men and being buried as a Greek Orthodox woman next to her male life partner. Rosa's success was her charm, radiant and flamboyant character, and talented voice. She was not an Asia Minor refugee, never lived in Izmir or Asia Minor, as thought, juxtaposed to most of those in her movement who were refugees, outcasts in modern Greek society, professed counterculture, smoking hashish, singing jail songs, fighting for jobs as laborers, and living alternative lifestyles. She adopted the culture of her pareia, her Greek social peer group. She was so successful that the songs were associated with her and not the composers. While she had relatives who identified as Jews and were personalities in the Greek media, like talk host Maria Razan, she left her Jewish enclave in former Ottoman Salonika at a young age in the early 1920s when the refugees arrived in Athens and totally meshed into their Greek counterculture. Her Jewish past was irrelevant. She was a star, traveled the world, and put Rembetiko on the map. In a theocratic modern Greek culture, she went with the flow of the Greek Orthodox, Greek-speaking friends and was an integral part of them. If they celebrated Christmas and Easter, so did she. She totally left her Jewish roots, and because of her social acceptance due to her musical attributes, she was thought of as a real Greek and buried as a Greek Orthodox, even though she never converted and was very far from being a traditional Eastern Orthodox, attending church, fasting twice a week, and living by the dictates of the Greek Orthodox Church. Conversely, Aris Sans wandered from Greece to Israel, became a hit Greek singer in Greek and Hebrew in Israel, lived in practical terms as a secular Jewish Israeli in Tel Aviv, and then as an Israeli nightclub star in New York until he died of drug overdoses. Both singers were oddities in local cultures coming from rival religions, but being accepted as national cultural icons. Athenian Greek-Jewish Holocaust survivor, author, and filmmaker Nestoras Matza converted to Greek Orthodoxy first during his hiding in the Holocaust as a young teenager, returned to Judaism after the liberation, and then returned to Christianity after his retirement. Popular U.S. folk singer Cat Stevens, originally called Stephen Dimitri Georgiou, of Jewish and Greek origin, converted to Islam, took the name Yusef Islam, and lives in fundamentalist circles in London. Silvio Santos, former Senor Abravanel, son of Salonican Jewish immigrants to Rio de Janeiro in the early 20th century, and popular pop music television host and wealthy entrepreneur in Brazil, converted to Christian evangelism in his later years after a remarriage. Lastly, Chief Rabbi of Rome, Israel Zoli, who survived the Holocaust in Rome, suddenly and precariously after World War II converted to Catholicism and became an archivist in the Vatican. Now, of course, I don't have time to read the whole analysis of all the stages of his life where he started believing in, let's say, another faith. Already in World War I, he had visions of Jesus. And in 1937-38, he had continued visions. And this epiphany theme is relevant because in some of these personalities, they had these dreams which influenced them to eventually later take on another religion. In his memoirs, Zoli recounted a final, very profound religious experience which he underwent on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement in 1944. During the last service on that holiest of days in the Jewish calendar, Zoli described himself as withdrawn from the ritual, conscious of neither sorrow or joy, and devoid of thought and feeling. His heart was lifeless, he wrote. Then suddenly came a vision of Christ, whom the chief rabbi was soon to embrace as the Savior. And then he wrote here, I saw Jesus Christ clad in a white mantle, and beyond his head and the blue sky, I experienced the greatest interior peace. If I were to give an image of the state of my soul at that moment, I would say, a crystal clear lake amid high mountains. Within my heart I found the words, you are here for the last time. I considered them with the greatest serenity of soul and without any particular emotion. The reply of my heart was, so it is, so it shall be, so it must be. This is all taken from a book written recently about why Zoli converted from theological reasons. Zoli elaborated on the events that occurred in the wake of Jesus' Yom Kippur manifestation. Later that evening, after he had broken the obligatory Yom Kippur fast, in other words, they're talking about the evening of Yom Kippur, Zoli's wife informed him that she too had a vision of Christ. She claimed that when her husband had stood before the Holy Ark, she had seen a white figure of Jesus place his hands on the rabbi's head as if to bless him. In 1943, Zoli was in hiding in the house of a member of Rome's resistance party, Justicia e Libertà. He claimed that he reportedly gave advance warning of the imminent Nazi arrest of the Jews of Rome. Some critics claimed he failed to warn the Jews of Rome about what was to happen, and this failure was a serious moral lapse. When he came out of hiding, he fought to get back his title of chief rabbi. After the war, a great debate arose between the president of the Jewish community in Rome, Senor Foa, and Zoli as to who was at fault for allowing the Nazis to obtain the list of the Roman Jews. Each blamed the other. Jane Scrivener, in her book Inside Rome with the Germans, published immediately after the war in 1945, wrote, the rabbi did not destroy the registers, and they knew where every Jew lived. On page 135, she wrote, Chief Rabbi of Rome becomes a Catholic, suggesting Zoli's culpability in not destroying the register indicated that his future must lie elsewhere than in the Jewish community. That was like the Jewish version after the war. But no one knew about his theological past, which in the course of 20 years exhibited that he believed in Christ, and this only came out later. Rabbi Daniel Chione of Sofia, he was like the younger rabbi. The chief rabbi was already old, had organized the demonstrations in Sofia, Bulgaria, in May 1943 to persuade the pro-German Bulgarian government not to deport the Jews from Old Bulgaria, the Bulgarian state, as opposed to the Jews of Macedonia and Thrace, annexed to Bulgaria, who were denied Bulgarian citizenship and were deported to their deaths in Treblinka. Now, originally, there was supposed to be a demonstration organized by the Jewish community, and the Jewish leaders had their fears, and they canceled it. So the communists organized a protest, and the Probo-Slavic Orthodox Church leaders agreed with it and went with it, as did Daniel Chione and the main base of the Jews. So Vicky Tamir, who wrote about Bulgarian Jewry, wrote, as to Daniel Chione, his reasons for supporting the demonstration had been strictly personal. A mystic who believed in occultism and divine phenomenology, he had often been at odds with the other Orthodox religious establishment rabbis and with non-Orthodox Zionist leaders. In fact, the previous winter, he had been retired from his position on the Beit Din because he distributed amongst Bulgarian politicians without authorization a circular alleging containing God's messages delivered personally to him. On May 24, in line with his established pattern of individualist action, he denounced the reversal of the consistory's initial decision to demonstrate and joined the shouting communists, his explanation being both that the royal advisor Lulchev, whom he shared some mystical pursuits, and Archbishop Stefan, with whom he maintained cordial relations, had backed the idea of a march to the palace. Even if it was true, neither of the two prominent Bulgarians had been aware of the communist designs that would be involved. In the 30s, Chione had become a follower of Dunov, a teacher of a mystical type of Christianity, mixing mysticism, Christianity, vegetarianism, and a form of yoga. Dunov spoke of Jesus as the Messiah and the Savior, and of the simple lifestyle of the early disciples of Jesus. This became an eye-opener to the Orthodox rabbi. However, according to what Rabbi Chione wrote, the major change came into his life when he was praying, watching the sunrise, and a vision of Jesus appeared to him. He did not know what the vision meant, so he asked some of the other rabbis what he should do. After the third time that the same vision reappeared, Rabbi Daniel turned toward the figure and spoke to him. The figure was scintillating right out from the sun, and Rabbi Daniel received the impression that he spoke to him, identifying himself as Yeshua, Jesus. That's how the Jews for Jesus call him, Yeshua, as opposed to Yehoshua as the Jew. According to a Jew from Jesus' source, Rabbi Shulam, Chione consulted the archimandrite Stephan, with whom he was in close contact, and the patriarch, understanding the delicate relationship between the Jews and the Christians, only encouraged the rabbi to forget about Christianity and concentrate on Jesus himself. Rabbi Daniel's affinity toward Jesus would become a well-known secret amongst the Jewish community of Sofia. After the Holocaust, he served the community as chief rabbi until 1949, until the mass aliyah to Israel. He resided in Yafo, and in 1958, when Tel Aviv chief rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano became minister of religion, he wanted Rabbi Chione to be a judge on the rabbinical court of Jerusalem. However, Chione expressed his belief in Jesus as the Messiah, but did not accept Christianity as the true expression of Jesus as Messiah. One thing led to another, and Rabbi Chione was invited to the rabbinical court where he presented 4 books that he had written in Bulgarian about Jesus as the Messiah. Chione was stripped of his rabbinical title. However, the Bulgarian Jews continued to honor him as their rabbi, and a veteran Russian Jewish settler from Rishon LeZion, who was a new follower of Jews for Jesus, gave Rabbi Chione a building on Yefet Street in Yafo for a synagogue, where he officiated until October 6, 1973, the beginning of the Yom Kippur War. He wouldn't talk about Jesus openly in sermons, but invited the Jews for Jesus followers to his house on the Sabbath afternoon for study about Yeshua and from the New Testament. He refused money from missionaries for them to use his name for endorsements, but if they gave him free will donations, he passed the money on to charity for the blind, orphans, and widows. In Bulgaria and Israel, he wrote many poems about the Messianic Jesus. He died in 1979 at the age of 96 and is buried as a Jew in Chulon. In Athens and later Chania, Crete, Nikos Stavroulakis has created Jewish museums merging Romaniot, Sephardic, and Ottoman, Turkish, Muslim, and modern Greek Orthodox traditions. He himself is of a mixed Sephardic, crypto-Jewish Muslim Dunmei, follower of Shabtai Tzvi, and Greek Orthodox religion and backgrounds. An academic who has been a pioneer in creating Jewish studies in Russia is Serge Kaplanov, who is of a mixed rabbinic Jewish, Karaite, Muslim, and Russian Orthodox origin, and has researched the history of Portuguese Jewish aristocrats in the courts of the St. Petersburg Russian Orthodox Tsars. Several noted Jewish cultural personalities converted to Islam through their contact with Muslim society in the Middle East and Near East. Famous Jewish Egyptian singer, actress, and film star of the 1930s to 1950s, Laila Murad, converted to Islam. Considered the Cinderella of the Egyptian cinema, first appearing at age 17 in 1935 in the film Al-Sahaya, The Victims, she was a national star as a singer and in film until 1955. In 1945, she discreetly married the actor Anwar Vagdi, and after the death of her father, the composer and cantor Zaki Murad in 1946, she converted to Islam for the benefit of her husband. The conversion was a shock to the Jewish community, and after that she cut off contact with the Jewish community. She divorced in 1951, appeared in films in 1955, and then lived a relatively secluded life for 40 years in her Cairo home until her death in 1995. After the divorce, Vagdi slandered her by spreading rumors that she donated money to Israel. She publicly proved by exposing her bank account that this was untrue, reinforced her patriotism to Egypt, and in 1952, in the aftermath of the Nasser-led revolution, she performed nationalist songs and was photographed as such in the press. The Egyptian government officially exonerated her from the malicious charges, but the Syrian government persisted in placing a total ban on her songs and films. Joel Benin put Murad in perspective with other Jewish movie stars who converted to Islam. Religious conversions by performing artists like Laila Murad and Daoud Husni were not unusual, but neither did they erase the Jewish identity of the converts. In February 1955, the newspaper Rosa Ashkenazi related that Omar Sharif converted to Islam. According to some accounts, he was born Jewish. To marry Fatin Hamama, and that Nigma Ibrahim converted from Judaism to Islam when she married Abbas Yunus. There was and continues to be a substantial commercial market in Egypt for stargazing gossip of the sort, and the Jewish origins of several of the stars did not diminish the public's interest in them. Aside from its commercial appeal, the main point in Ruz al-Yusuf's reporting on the religious identities of Egypt's leading actors and actresses seems to be that the conversion was common amongst movie stars, who generally did not appear to make their religious faith very seriously. Despite apparently having been motivated by convenience rather than conviction, these conversions were reported without any pejorative tone. The suspension of moral judgment was undoubtedly facilitated because all the conversions were to Islam, and apostasy from the true faith was not an issue. End of the quote. Also converting to Islam were the Ashkenazim Lev Nussenboim, who was a 20th century writer, journalist, and Orientalist, and Leopold Weiss, born 1900 and died 1992, a Lvov-born Viennese journalist, author, and translator who visited the Hejaz in the 1930s and became Pakistani ambassador to the United Nations in the early 50s. Weiss's Muslim name became Mohammed Assad, fully immersing himself in Muslim society, and he spent his last years in Tangiers, Sintra, Portugal, beginning in 1982, and finally in Mijes on the Costa del Sol in southern Spain. His monumental works were his full translation and commentary of the Quran, finished and published in 1980 in Gibraltar under the title of The Message of the Quran, and his book The Road to Mecca, written in New York and published in 1954. His encounters with Islam in Germany and Jerusalem prompted him to convert to Islam in 1926, and his journeys to Saudi Arabia, contact with King Ibn Saud, India, and Pakistan led to his immersion in the Muslim Middle East and Near East and Asia, but he needed primarily a Mediterranean atmosphere to absorb and write about Islam and his personal conversion. According to Martin Kramer, Weiss had a supercilious feeling toward the basic premises of Judaism. But by age 13, he read and spoke Hebrew with great fluency and was lured in 1922 to visit his maternal uncle, the psychoanalyst Dorian Feigenbaum, who headed a mental institution in Jerusalem. While staying at Feigenbaum's house in the Old City, he began to explore Muslim society outside the walls of the Old City. He befriended Jacob Dahan, who went from being a Zionist to an anti-Zionist before his assassination in 1924, and the latter introduced him to the Emir Abdullah of Transjordan in the summer of 1923, the first of many Arab heads he would meet in his lifetime. Weiss became a stringer, a journalist, in Jerusalem for the Frankfurter Zeitung, wrote against Zionism, favored Muslim and Arab nationalism, and had a strong anti-British bias. After publishing a small book on his political orientation, his newspaper sent him to travel to develop the subject into a full-size book, and his query turned into a 2-year journey. In Cairo, Weiss was inspired by Sheikh Mustafa al-Maraji, a reformist theologian who later became rector of the noted Muslim theological institution Al-Azhar. In September 1926, Weiss also experienced an epiphany. He had a flash of insight near the Jaffa Gate. The Arabs were the heirs to the biblical Hebrews, not the Jews. Shortly afterward, on the Berlin subway, he had another flash. No one on the train smiled, despite their finery and prosperity. Although these people were at the pinnacle of Western material achievement, they were unhappy. Returning home, Kramer noted that Weiss, glancing at his Quran, read the verse, "You are obsessed by greed for more and more until you go down to your graves." And in continuation, the verse stated, "Nay, if you but knew it with the knowledge of certainty, you would indeed see the hell you are in." Weiss wrote, "All doubt that the Quran was a God-inspired book vanished. He went to the leader of the Berlin Islamic Society, declared his adherence to Islam, and took the name Muhammad Assad. Islam appealed to him as harmoniously conceived, nothing is superfluous and nothing lacking, with the result of an absolute balance and solid composure." All right, let's see, 5 minutes? Okay, so I don't have time to talk. There's a lot to talk about him because he's an important personality, but you see his immersion into Islamic society. He was a purist. He married 4 times. He had a lot of problems because he didn't exactly divorce when he left the women. Okay. Ibn Saud sent him on missions sort of as a spy. He thought that the only purist Islamic society were the Sanusi movement that were crushed by the Italian forces in Libya in 1931. His wife Elsa died 9 days after their pilgrimage to Mecca in January 1927 of a tropical disease. He took 2 wives in Saudi Arabia in 28 and 31. So the second Muslim wife from Saudi Arabia, her family were suspected of intrigues against Ibn Saud, so he had to leave Saudi Arabia. In the 30s, he became enamored with India, and they noticed the discontent of the Muslim population in Kashmir under a Maharaja backed by British colonialism. And in 1939, he unsuccessfully tried to rescue his family from Nazi-occupied Vienna, but he went back to India as a enemy national. He was Austrian. He was incarcerated for 6 years with Nazis, Germans, Austrians, and Italians in India. He corresponded with his father and family in Vienna until 1942, and then they were taken to camps. And then, upon his release, he wholeheartedly identified with the Pakistani cause for independence, which he viewed as the framework for an ideal Islamic polity. He became the director of the Department of Islamic Reconstruction, and he made proposals for the Constitution. None of them, except for the preamble, were accepted in the end. I mean, he wasn't a politician. He was a believer in Islam, and he lost out totally in the political game. In 1949, he became part of the Pakistani Foreign Service and became the head of the Middle East Division. In 1952, he was sent to New York to be the ambassador to the United Nations. And then a jealous colleague in the Pakistani delegation made a scandal of his romance with Pola Hamida, an American of Polish Catholic descent who converted to Islam and whom he married in a civil ceremony by a New York judge after he terminated his marriage to his 4th wife from Saudi Arabia, who he had left like 12 years ago, and they had a son. But the scandal prompted also the Prime Minister of Pakistan to oppose the marriage. And so he had to resign from his post at the UN. He went back to Pakistan. We're almost finished. And then he couldn't get another position, so he was destitute and desperate. So in short, he got a contract from Simon & Schuster to write his book about the Orient and Mecca. And basically, he lived for 20, 30 years in the Mediterranean, first in Tangier, and then in Geneva, but mostly in Spain and Portugal, in a nice, serene Mediterranean, like a resort-type atmosphere where he could write about his life in Islam and the purest Islam. I even wrote about other academics. I won't even say any details about David Romano, who was a historian on Sephardic Jewry who converted to Christianity in Barcelona, and Giza Vermes, who, of Hungarian background, he went back and forth between Christianity and Judaism. He's still living. Ma? No, הפוך לא. But I'm talking about artists. All right, okay. All right, now let me read the conclusion and then we'll finish, okay? Amidst the diversity of these Mediterranean personalities, there are a few commonalities. Mesmerizing singers like Rosa Ashkenazi and Ari Sanz switched cultures without converting to the new religion of their new culture, but were so symbolic to the new group that they were identified with the latter. In the Holocaust, many Jews converted to Christianity after hiding in the monasteries, but few like Nestoras Matza did in Greece and elsewhere in the Mediterranean. Later in life, he and others like Silvio Santos found their destination in denominations popular in New Age culture. Chief Rabbi Zoli of Rome and Sion in Sofia were driven by personal visions of Christ well before the Holocaust, but such identification only came out after the tremors of the Holocaust. Cultural figures and academics like Stavroulakis and Kaplanov are mixtures of numerous Mediterranean, Balkan, and Eastern Europe religions and Jewish subcultures. While predominantly Jewish by affiliation, they also identify with their other ancestral religions and traditions. Artists and performers like Layla Murad converted to Islam out of convenience, meeting other stars and adopting the Muslim state religion. Leopold Weiss and others found salvation and serenity in Islam from their travels. Being a purist, he eventually lost his diplomatic career, but found serenity around the Mediterranean to write about his Muslim path and religion. Cat Stevens Yusuf Islam of the 60s generation found his destiny with a radical Muslim fundamentalist religion. Multi-ethnic and multi-religious settings around the Mediterranean enabled musicians, artists, politicians, theologians, and others to change religions and affiliations. In the 20th century, Balkan and Cypriot conflicts forced partners of mixed marriages to divorce. But in cases like Leopold Weiss or Rabbi Zoli, the spouses also eagerly converted to the new religion. Most of the examples given are of Jews leaving the fold in the Mediterranean, symptomatic historically of the dwindled numbers of the Jewish people. Judaism has no penalty for apostasy as opposed to Islam and Catholicism before the modern age. Furthermore, creative and talented people often look for their bliss and destiny in other cultures and faiths. Regarding the Greek Orthodox, they also have their traditions, whether by force or choice, of converting to Islam.